Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories, and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light, and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. STOPSIS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to STOPSIS. Hey, my friends. Big welcome to Stop Suffering in Silence. Before we jump in to today's powerful conversation, first of all, my name is Denise Walsh, and I am with my friend Rachel Timothy. If you want to learn more about Rachel's story, we did a whole podcast episode about the details of her story, and I posted in the link, like in the show notes below or in the description box. So be sure to listen to that and grab her book so you can really get some of the nitty-gritty details of what happened, not only in her childhood, but also in her adult years. This podcast is about talking about the effects of trauma, as well as how to step into kind of a new life through the process of healing. And we know that, we're just having a good conversation. We don't have all of the answers. Rachel's sharing her experience. I'm sharing mine as a former clinical psychologist and the work that I have personally done, but we want to hear from you too. So we have created two ways that you can connect with us. The first one is on our Instagram. In the link tree, you're going to see a Google form that will allow you to share a bit of your story and some question and ask a question. There will be some episodes that we do Q&A type of, episode where we're going to just go through your questions. So be sure to leave them there. And then we also have a texting app, group texting community thing where if you text Stop SIS to 616-236-4366. So again, that's STOPSIS at 616-236-4366. You will be added to a group. And this is not a group text where you're going to get like responses from everybody. This is just a way for us to communicate with you every week when a new episode goes live. And then you can respond back to us and ask us questions, engage with us in that way. This really is a community and we want you to be involved. So please be sure to connect with us. All the information is on the Instagram page. And then finally, thank you to everybody who has left reviews and messaged us, texted us, Facebook messaged us. Like, we have gotten such great feedback from you, and we so appreciate your involvement. Thank you for those who left a review. We know that the reviews on Apple Podcast and Spotify really help us reach more people who desire to learn about this topic. And then it also helps us to get really great guests when they know that you guys are involved in the podcast and that you're like into it and that you listen and that you, that you're a engaged community, they will be more likely to say yes. And so we have a list of people that we're reaching out to, including, for example, there's a girl who does treatment for pedophiles, and we're super curious to pick her brain. But there's a lot of other people that we want to bring onto the show, and your review really helps. And so we did give away an OpenBlindEyes bundle to Kristen, Stephanie, and Angie, and we reached out to all of them and sent those out in the mail, and we are going to do another blast. So this means that for those who leave a review between the time this episode goes live and a week from then. So let me get the dates. It would be July 21st through August 1st. For those who leave a review during that specific week, we are going to send you one of a kind STOPSIS t-shirts. This is a t-shirt that we're giving to all the girls at the retreat. And so I can't tell you all the details about it, but it's so special and includes a butterfly logo that Rachel actually drew herself. And so this would be a really special thing to have. I mean, it's really beautiful. So I hope that you want it and you should. And I don't know if we're going to actually sell them on our website or, if we're going to order in bulk or if they're just going to be for the girls on the retreat. But we are going to pick one of you who leaves a review in this next week. So thank you again for your support, for sharing and all that good stuff. Rachel, let's jump into the topic.
And it's a fun topic.
It is. I know. Everything we talk about is like, this is going to be really fun and hard. We're going to talk about the issue or the idea of forgiveness today. And before we jump into like, we all should forgive, because we know if it were that easy, we would already be doing it. We're going to start with some of the hard discussions that kind of preface the idea of forgiveness. And one of the steps in the grief process on the way to kind of forgiveness and making meaning and all of that is acceptance and recognizing that this did happen and I cannot change it. And because I think part of the grief process is fighting that reality. So I'd love to hear a bit about your process in accepting, in maybe shifting to a place where you got to, or even the idea of forgiveness entered your mind.
Well, honestly, it was a weird process. I know that doesn't surprise you, but in the beginning, I didn't feel like I had anything to forgive. I didn't hold anger towards anybody. But mind you, I was in like this numb state. I don't think I had fully recognized just how awful things were. And so people would often be confused at how I wasn't angry. And I just thought, well, maybe this is a miracle from God. Maybe anger and unforgiveness is not an issue I have. And honestly, it wasn't until I recognized the effects that the trauma I experienced then had on my kids that there began to be a little bit of an anger rise. And then the more that I began to love myself, the more that I began to be upset at the things that happened to me as a kid and have an anger. One of the worst feelings for me is anger. I just don't like the way anger sits on my stomach. Like it's a struggle for me. And so as soon as I did start to feel the anger, I would hear from people, you need this. You need to feel anger for what happened to you. But at the same time, I didn't want to stay there. I had to follow that anger with something that was going to comfort me. And it was a process of just trying to figure out the balance of, I don't want them to think that this was okay, because it wasn't. And it has drastically changed my life. But I also can't be controlled. I was already controlled by them in one way. I don't want to be controlled by anger and unforgiveness at the same, afterwards. So that was kind of the first time that forgiveness came into the picture for me.
I think it's fascinating that you said that it really came to an acceptance of, man, this was trauma. Mm-hmm. Because like we talked about in last week's episode, our brain tries to justify things to make it okay. Yeah. This is why people stay in jobs they hate, because they justify it to say like, at least here, I know what to expect. At least here, we justify things. I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago who has had a trauma, and every time it happened, she would say, well, at least this happened. At least at least he goes to church, or at least this, and so I think oftentimes we can live in a situation that really isn't healthy without even realizing it. And so that radical acceptance and getting to a place where we go, no, this isn't okay anymore.
Yes.
Is a part of that process. And then once you identify that, like, no, this is not okay, then I think the grief can set in too, because then you realize what may have been lost along the way.
Yeah. So then you reach a point of almost mourning the life that you would have had if the trauma had not entered. And yeah, I think that's part of the process.
Yeah. So mourning, and that's kind of the wishing, I wish this didn't happen. I wish that didn't happen. Anytime you're in a spot that says, I wish, or if only this hadn't happened, if only, those are kind of some key words that we're living in the past, and we're still wrestling with this idea of, I wish it didn't happen, or, obviously we all wish it all didn't happen all of the time, but you can't quite move into forgiveness when you're still wrestling with that.
Yeah, correct. And it's laying it down. It's looking at it for what it really is and being able to kind of hand it away to God and say, okay, I can't hold this anymore.
Yeah. So the radical honesty, it's kind of like getting to the rock bottom where you just go, I can't wrestle with this anymore. I can't change what happens. I have to accept what happened. And when you accept what happens or what happened, then I feel like you gain some of that power back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think perspective is huge, and praying for a different perspective on it. I was just thinking the other day, I was having a flashback, and I don't know why, but this image came in my mind of seeing the flashback and then thinking, man, I had to live through that. But then almost twisting it to, I lived through that and I survived. Like, just simply changing that perspective of, poor me, I had to live through that. And now I know it still affects me too. Heck yeah, I lived through that, and I am bigger and stronger and a survivor as a result. Just that little perspective change kind of gave me a strength and gave me back control.
Did you go through any sort of exercises with your counselor, or like letters or journal entries or whatever, to forgive perpetrators and to forgive yourself? Where do you feel like you started?
A couple different places. So first, let me share a story that years ago, probably 4 years ago, I was listening to a speaker, and his first name was Nick, and I can't think of his last name at the moment, but he was sharing a little bit of his story, and he shared about this radical testimony of going over to India and meeting some sex trafficking victims. And it was the red light community. I mean, it was just jam-packed full of brothels. And he talked about going in and ministering to these victims and how impactful that was. And mind you, I had literally just clicked on this sermon, having no idea that somewhere in the middle he would talk about sex trafficking victims. So it was a God thing for sure. But towards the end of his testimony of sharing what it was like to be amongst those brothels and amongst those survivors, he shared a story about how he was taken into this one room where this elderly woman was extremely ill, like she was almost crippled, couldn't walk, all these, just kind of hunched over and everything. And along her back wall were all the Hindu gods. And the woman, obviously didn't speak his language, but through an interpreter, he ministered to her and he told her about Jesus. And there was a difference in how it was almost like a healing experience for her, because she was able to move and function better by the time he left. And she went to go praise the Hindu gods. And he said, no, that was Jesus who saved you. That was Jesus who healed you. Neat story, amazing story, godly story. Well, he walks out of this house, and the man next to him was like, do you realize who you just talked to? And he's like, no. Well, that's the woman who created this whole brothel community. She was the reason all of these women are being sold every single day. She's the leader. And he had no idea. But because he touched her heart through Jesus, that brothel, that red light community was taken down within a year. And so by reaching the heart of that perpetrator, it saved thousands of victims. And so that was something that I heard 3-4 years ago. And it hit me hard. Like, yes, we need to be fighting for victims, but we also need to make sure that we are taking time to help these pedophiles stop what they're doing, help these perpetrators stop what they're doing. So that was kind of the first moment for me where I thought about perpetrators from that perspective. Another time that really hit me hard, and I'm bringing this up because it was brought to my attention again this morning, and I think the timing was God. But if you've ever listened to the sermon from Louis Giglio, don't give Satan a seat at your table. And it hit me because, I have every reason to be angry. I have every reason to hold anger and unforgiveness in my heart towards what was taken from me, what was done to me, how it has affected my life. But when I do that, I'm not hurting the perpetrator. I'm hurting myself. And I am giving Satan a seat at my table. And it's going to change my life for the bad by simply allowing him that foothold of unforgiveness in my heart. And I've had enough of Satan in my life. Like I can't let him have a seat at my table. I'm not going there again. And so that was kind of the second time of, okay, I need to work on my forgiveness. I need to work on letting that go, giving that to God, because within my own hands, it's too much. It's too much for me to carry.
So how does one go? Like, actually, I feel like there's two things right here. Like, there's your head and there's your heart. And like, we can say all the right things, and we can know all the right things, and we can know that forgiveness is helpful, and we can know that it frees ourselves and it doesn't make the action okay. But yet in our heart of hearts, we're still pissed. We're still hurt. We still wish things were different. And so how did, besides, maybe thoughts, like the perspective changes, how did you really start to soften your heart to allow forgiveness to take root?
Well, I don't think it was me. I think it was God. I know that whenever I would talk about it to God and say to him, that I want to forgive these people, that I can't hold this anymore, his strength would fill me, but it would only last for a time. And it's like, the next time a flashback would come, that anger would rise up again. I would be reminded of what I had lost, or there'd be other things, repercussions from the trauma done to me that affected me. Lisa Turkhurst actually talks about this often. She had a betrayal in her life, and yes, she forgives, but it's an ongoing forgiveness. Each time you face another moment of where the trauma impacts you, you have to forgive again. You have to forgive again. And the more you do it, the more it becomes a habit, and the more God kind of fills you then with a peace that lasts longer.
I remember going through my own betrayal situation. I want to see if I can find the verse that I'm specifically thinking of. But I asked my counselor, I was like, how many times do I have to forgive? And she's like, 77 times. Is that what's in the Bible? And you're just like, oh gosh. But I think we get to do a few things. Forgiveness doesn't mean we still hang out with them. It doesn't mean that they're still our best friends. It doesn't mean that we submit in a dangerous marriage. It doesn't mean that we turn the other cheek and stay in a situation where we're being hurt or someone else we love is being hurt. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness still can allow for boundaries, and it still can allow for, this isn't good for me anymore, and I'm choosing a new behavior. And so for me, when I realized that forgiveness didn't mean that I had to stay in the sucky situation, it gave me permission to take care of myself, and forgiveness was a part of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember thinking that if I forgave, then it was giving a green light for it to happen again. And that's not the case. And I know a lot of trauma survivors will say, I can't forgive them because I need them to know how bad this hurts. I need them to suffer for what they did to me. And I mean, that's a human instinct. I think, I mean, don't shame yourself for those feelings. I think that's part of being a human. But when you start to realize that you actually take back more control whenever you do let go and forgive, then that kind of shifts things for you.
Yeah. So I found the verse, Matthew 18:22. When Peter asked if he should forgive his brother, and Jesus replied, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. And I think that is just a great reminder that it's not a one and done type of situation, that it truly, I call them onion layers, onion layers. You're releasing. And there will come a time where you may see that same trigger, a car driving down the road, somebody being late, whatever the case may be, that usually would make you go into a freak out. And because you've emotionally separated yourself from that wrong action, you can go, well, you're the dumb one. and you know what I mean?
Yes.
In the PG way. But it really doesn't have to keep bugging you. And I think that's something that the more you clear the cobwebs of your heart and really do allow these things to be released, the more you have space for love and you don't have that emotional string attached as much anymore.
Yeah, you have more space for healing and for doing what God's called you to do when you make space with that forgiveness. Now, I can't tell you that if I saw my abuser this moment, that I would show forgiveness. I can't, because I can't say that I am, 100% there. I am trying my hardest. And I probably sound like I have all these answers that here's how you take these 5 steps and you'll forgive. It's just not like that. But I don't have the strength within myself to forgive. Only God can do that. And I have to remember that this is not within my power because it hurts. It hurts too much.
One of the things we do in 90 Day U-Turn is we have a couple weeks where we talk about anger, resentment, guilt, shame, and forgiveness. And it's probably the, hardest weeks of the program, but it's also the most freeing, because oftentimes what we do is we stuff and we bottle and we pretend like it's not there, but it's just bubbling underneath the surface. And so what this program allows people to do is, in a safe space where you are given time to talk and share with other people who kind of get you, is we write a letter to that person who hurt us, or we write a letter to ourselves who made a decision that we now regret, or things like that. And what it does is it takes this bubbling underneath the surface and it brings it to light. And just like your journal entries, bringing it to light is part of that clearing process. And then we have a few affirmations that we end with. And again, I know it's not a flip of the switch. It's an onion layer. And what's cool is somebody may go, I don't know, this is helpful, but the next few days they feel lighter, Mm-hmm. And so one of the affirmations we use at the end of our letter is, they did the best that they could with the information they had at the time. Or, I did the best that I could with the information I had at the time. Now that I know better, I will do better. And then we always end with, forgiveness is a choice I make for myself. And now that I've made it, I am free. And the power of these exercises of bringing that darkness into light, acknowledging the suck, because we're not saying you shouldn't feel this way, or you should just get over it, or let them back into playing with small children. Like, no, nobody is saying that. But acknowledging the suck and then saying, all right, now what can I do with it, is a powerful part of that grieving process.
Yeah. And I think it's huge too, to talk about forgiving yourself, because I will probably be able to forgive my abuser a whole lot quicker than I'll be able to forgive myself. And I have a lot of anger towards myself. I mean, when you read my story, I've had people who've written reviews about my book saying there were times they were angry at me at the decisions that I was continuing to make. And I get it. Like, it was infuriating. And I have to live with that. And I have to forgive myself, because you just, for your own healing. But God brought something to my attention yesterday, and I got to have a couple kids over to my house who they have experienced trauma. They went through some pretty severe trauma before they were eventually adopted. And these children have experienced suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts. One of them, when they were here, it was made very clear to me by the mom, keep a close eye on her. She's under suicide watch. And I sat there and I watched her play Barbies with my little girls. And I couldn't help but just have a compassion, and my heart just broke for them. They didn't deserve any of this. They didn't deserve to feel suicidal at the age of 12. But then it took me back to my years and my time of when I felt that way. And God was like telling me, you didn't deserve that either. You didn't deserve to feel suicidal at age 12. You didn't deserve the pain you went through. No different than these children playing Barbies at your house. And it was like a hug from God for me. And I shared it then with the trauma survivors too. And I think every one of them made a comment about how their heart broke for those kids, but not one of them then said anything about the inner child within them that was hurt as well. And so it's difficult. It's difficult to see yourself as truly not to blame for what happened.
I often say, what would you say to your daughter, right? Yeah. If she were to go through something like this, and if she were to come to you and say X, Y, and Z happened, how would you respond to her? And oftentimes it would not be the way we respond to ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And part of that's from the trauma. Part of that's just human nature. We're harder on ourselves than we are other people.
Yeah. So one of the steps of forgiveness is, and this is really part of the grief cycle as well, is making meaning out of purpose for the pain, essentially. And I know for the betrayals that I've experienced, the heartbreak that I've experienced, I sat in them longer than expected. And then I would beat myself up for not being over it yet. You know what I mean? We just, so I've had to do a lot of these exercises myself, where I write letters, where I throw it away, where I talk to the person and obviously you couldn't do that, but in my situation, I was trying to repair a relationship that I then realized wasn't repairable because they took no ownership for the experience. And I thought, this just isn't a relationship I want to be a part of. And, but years later, as I continued to work through this my goal was to not let it fester. My goal was to get to the other side. At some point, I got to a place where I was like, you know what? If that hurt hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have met Rachel. I wouldn't have created 90-Day U-Turn. I wouldn't have written my book. I wouldn't have done the things that I'm doing now. And I saw meaning for that hurt. And then, I don't know, I know everybody's situation is so different, but how have you gotten to a place where you can bring purpose to the pain?
No, that's one of my favorite things about God. I had somebody reach out to me not too long ago and said, is there any way you could explain to me how God is a good God if he allowed you to be trafficked like he did? And I was excited to answer it, because yes, I can tell you 1,000 ways that God is a good God, despite me being trafficked. And one of those ways is how much good he has brought as a result of what I've been through. He didn't cause what I went through, but he also used it to make it to where I can have new relationships like you, like with the survivors. I have a story that points straight to him. I'm able to communicate better with my kids. I'm a better wife. All these different things have been stepping stones in my own maturity, because I mean, I was a very just surface level Christian prior to 2014 when it all hit me and I became broken. I didn't realize how fake I was. I didn't realize how I only knew the scriptures in my head. I didn't know them in my heart. I couldn't feel them. And it wasn't until I experienced some of the darkest lows that you can that I was able to meet God there. And I was able to see that God does not live up on his throne. He lives in my heart. And every time I was hurt, he was being hurt with me. And he was experiencing those rapes. He was experiencing that abuse just like I was. He didn't leave me alone in those moments. And so knowing him differently made it to where I wanted to tell the whole world just how good he is, despite what I've been through, because I know so many people stay stuck in this anger towards God, and feeling sorry for themselves for what they went through. And most of them probably deserve to feel sorry for themselves. They've had a crappy life. But I'm just so thankful that God opened my eyes enough to where I now can share the good news that comes after trauma. And that fuels my soul. Like that just fills me up to where I'm overflowing. And yes, I still experience flashbacks and tremors and struggles daily, but there's good flowing from it as well. And I can communicate with people that I wouldn't have been able to prior to that. Like I can get it on a different level. And it's huge. It's huge for my own healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we would never say, I'm grateful that this happened. That's not the energy behind it. But I think that there's a way that you can take the blessings out of that burden and say, you know what, I'm going to live in these blessings. Mm-hmm. And because you now not only have a story of redemption and healing, but you can connect with people who are in that dark hole better than anybody. And you understand in a way that most people can't. And you're helping to educate on what happens in this world that a lot of times we just don't know about. And so, I think for all of us who have been through hard times, whether it be trauma, whether it be emotional abuse or domestic violence or addiction, or, your house burning down. I mean, there's so many different ways that losing your job, all these things kind of cause an abrupt end to the life that we thought we wanted to, we thought we were going in a direction, and then something outside of our control says, no, you're going over here. And that's grief. That's tricky. That's hard. That can be painful. But where we end up can be even better than we expected because of the valley. So making a mountain out of a molehill, forgiving yourself. I'm sorry, that's not what I mean. Making a mountain out of a molehill is actually a thought trap that we don't want to do. We want to make a blessing out of a burden. Yes. And bring purpose to that pain. And forgiving is a piece of that puzzle. So some things I would recommend to somebody who's been stirring in that anger. I mean, maybe you're up at night ruminating, because of course that happens to all of us, is acknowledge it. Radical acceptance, and then take that 100% responsibility for it by saying, what can I control? What can I do now? Brain dump that letter, get it all out, whether you give it to that person or you burn it or whatever. And then sign up for 90-day U-turn, because we will help you.
Yes. I also believe it's really difficult. It's not impossible, but it's really difficult to forgive when you're suffering in silence, because all you hear are the negative to yourself, especially forgiving yourself. Sometimes being able to verbalize to somebody, this is what happened to me, and to see their reaction of, holy cow, he did that to you, that helps you realize, okay, this wasn't my fault. So telling your story, I think, helps also with moving towards that forgiveness.
Yes, because oftentimes you guys, we justify it. Like we said, we justify it. We make it okay. Well, at least he's only hurting me and not the kids, or at least, he only hurts me once or twice a year, or, whatever it is, we justify it. So when you start saying those words out loud to friends, they can really help you gut check and say, no, 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 no. That's not good for you. That's not good for the kids. And you do not want to be in a situation like that.
Yeah. You've normalized it in your head. And
right.
Sometimes whether you're listening to somebody else's testimony, because we experienced that just recently, somebody who had heard my testimony was able to put different words to what happened to them as a result of hearing some of the abuse that I went through. And they knew this is not my fault.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you bring that darkness to light, once you bring that stuff that's been brewing underneath the surface, then you can do something with it.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, it's not a flip of the switch. This is not something that one and done. This is something that you're consistently coming back to, but it does get easier.
It does. And I think the pain will probably always be there. I can't imagine it not, especially when these doggone flashbacks keep coming. But despite the pain, when you know that there is a purpose and there are people who are seeing good come from, like, you're helping others. Oh, it just makes you want to get out of bed versus stay in bed and pity party.
Yeah. We have some really cool things happening within the group right now. In fact, we only have 2 weeks left and then we're going on a retreat. So we can't wait to tell you guys more about that. But you sure, if you are interested in joining us for the next round, that you go to the link in the description box and put your name on the waiting list. We want to, again, get a gauge of who's interested in the survivor cohort. There will be a fully paid 90-day U-turn available. The survivor cohort gives scholarships for people to participate. But we've had people get back to blogging and writing their stories out and getting it out into the world. We've had people start podcasts and really start outlining their book. And again, it's like ownership of your story gives you the freedom to tell it without shame. Mm-hmm. And so many cool things are happening because you're in a space to be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think just seeing these women, like when we first started, they couldn't dream. Like we talked about the dreaming, and they literally couldn't even think of a dream because dreaming wasn't safe. Now they're not only dreaming, they're pursuing their dreams. It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, you guys, we're just a bit like, holy stinking cow, this is amazing.
God is so good.
Yeah. And you've seen the Holy Spirit work throughout these weeks, not only within, you know, our hearts and our minds, but within our circumstances. And what I teach is called the Dream Life Pathway: head, heart, feet. Do we know what we want? Do we believe that it's possible? And do we know how to take steps to get it? And there's so many nuances to that, because again, when I first met Rachel, she would say, I don't even know my favorite color, because that's not in my world. I've never once thought of that, you know? So clarity is key. Like, what do I want? Like, let's create space to talk about that. But then when we think about the heart space, do I believe that it's possible? Ooh, baby, there's a lot of cobwebs that cover up that heart. And that's where the forgiveness comes in, because as we clear those cobwebs away and we like sever those emotional strings that are holding us back, it gives us space to believe. It gives us space to see ourselves 3 steps ahead of where we are now. So then we can say, all right, let's reverse engineer it and figure out how to get there. And let's start a podcast. Okay, press record, you know, and we start to really take action on that. But if we're out of alignment, meaning we could say we want something, but if our heart space isn't clear, that's the, yeah, right. We're not going to have the courage to take action. And so what we've seen over these weeks is this heart space getting clear, and forgiveness is a huge piece of that.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know, I just am blown away at sitting here talking with you on this podcast and knowing the journey that I've taken to get here. And knowing one of those pieces, yes, was, you know, laying down some of that forgiveness and forgiving myself and not carrying some of that shame so that I can be here and talk with you. But just seeing those little baby steps that I thought meant nothing. And yet God was preparing within me, but he was also preparing around me, people, a tribe, people who believed in me, and opportunities like this. Like 2 years ago, I never would have dreamt that this is what I'm getting to do. I couldn't even see it, couldn't see outside of the pain I was in. And now these beautiful things are growing. And I think God had planted that seed years ago. And those little baby steps was the watering of those seeds. And now I'm getting to experience the growth.
Well, before we end, I want to ask another tricky question because that is our job, apparently. I would be of the understanding that hurt people, and that it doesn't make it anything okay ever, but that oftentimes abusers have been abused themselves in some way. Do you agree with that? And what's your take on that?
Yeah, I do agree that oftentimes, I mean, hurt people are traumatized. There's all sorts of different coping skills. There's all sorts of different brain functions that change and rewiring. But when you think about how there is control and power to take that back, I mean, these perpetrators always had a choice. This was not something forced onto them. All of us have a choice as far as our behaviors go and getting the help that we desire. I think there's, I know for me, especially whenever I would, before I had fully addressed all of my trauma and all the things I was going through, and probably still, I'm not as good of a mom. I am not who they deserve as a mom. And I probably have traumatized my kids. We all need counseling, right? But the more I got healed, the better I am for them. And it's that way with anybody who's been through trauma. And I think it's Satan getting a foothold. It's letting him take control of your life. That's where the perpetrators lost their mind. And yes, I do think there is a pattern of hurt people. And I think there's something out there that talks about drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is my generational curse. It stops here. Like, no more. I am not taking this addiction any farther. I'm not taking this abuse any further. It is not going to continue in my family line. But a lot of people don't do that. And that's where it continues.
And that is what we're talking about next week.
Okay.
We are talking about that pivot point.
Yeah.
Because you can think about it in two different ways. As the survivor, when do I say, all right, enough is enough. I'm putting a line in the sand and I'm going to start this healing journey, no matter how hard it is. And you can think about it as a perpetrator. All right, enough is enough. Even if I experienced abuse, or even if, whatever the anger management issue is, or the pedophile issue is, or whatever it is, even if I've had abuse in my own past, I'm not going to continue it. And we all have this pivot point where we say, I don't want to be here anymore. And I'm going to now make the change. And so we're going to talk about that. We've heard from girls in our group where they made their own pivot points, where they had a baby and said, you know what, this is my wake up call, or they had a rock bottom, or they experienced something great. And we're like, I want more of that. There's a lot of different ways a pivot point can happen. I know when I was working in my clinical psychology job, I was working with a lot of low income, non-insured Medicaid, really just, it was the country. So boondocks and I don't know. But they didn't know that life could be different. And so they often didn't even have the vision of graduating high school because nobody in their family had. And so they had to make a pivot point too, of saying, no, I'm going to be different than what I see around me. And I think we've all done that in different ways throughout our life. And we're going to talk a bit more about that next week.
Yeah, I want to add too, and this has absolutely nothing to do with forgiveness, but we're talking about perpetrators and we're talking about making that choice. I don't think people realize that watching pornography is traumatizing, and it will traumatize that brain. It will rewire that brain to where they will be more likely to hurt somebody in the future. They will be making normal or normalizing what they see on that camera. And I know many people don't realize that majority of pornography is trafficking, and that these are not women who want to be there. But I also don't think people realize the effects that it has on their own brain, and how they're giving Satan a foothold that could then create in them a monster, I have trouble with that word, that is, that they're not going to be able to get away. Like, it's difficult. It's not impossible, but I think the world of pornography is causing so much hurt.
Yeah, it really is a stepping stone for all of this. And there's a lot of organizations dedicated to bringing down pornography and Pornhub and all of these things. And so we certainly are on their side. And that, again, could be a whole nother topic. But before we end, do you have anything else about forgiveness that you would like our listeners to hear?
I think I said something like this last time, but don't shame yourself for the journey with forgiveness either, because it's a journey. It's not black and white. And I think oftentimes as trauma survivors, we put things in black and white, and we want this now, or if we don't have it a little bit, we can't even picture that we have it at all. Do your best daily to forgive, and forgive yourself as much as you forgive others. And then when you still feel that anger, don't shame yourself, recognize it, and put it where it should go. Oftentimes I have found that when my anger comes up, I put it on people who don't deserve it. So make sure you are putting it where it's deservingly so, and don't shame yourself for it, but continue to work towards progress.
Yeah. Use the positive coping skills during that time. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Rachel, for sharing your experience. And again, forgiveness is not an easy topic to talk about, but it's so important. It's a huge part of the grieving process. And as we're grieving the life we wish we had, the life we wanted, the person we could have been without these upsets, we also can be grateful for who we are now. And I saw this quote recently. It was like, you are not responsible for the hurt, but you are responsible for the healing. And another one was I forget it. I should have had it pulled up, but it was something like, the person you are today is because of the effort you put in to heal yourself, and you get a pat on the back for that. Like, honor that, be proud of that, because a lot of times people do stay stuck, or they do continue the cycle of abuse, and or
they will blame themselves for the coping skills they used to get through the trauma. You know what? If that's what made it to where you survived, that's fine. That was enough. Now you can, make better decisions, but don't hold unforgiveness towards yourself for how you survived your trauma.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, thank you for hanging out with us, and be sure to join the texting group and leave a review as you can get one of the cool STOPSIS shirts that has Rachel's butterfly on it. We want to get that to you around the time of the retreat. It's a one and only. So I'm going to end with an I declare. So I declare a legacy, this is really perfect for today. I declare a legacy of faith over my life. I declare that I will store up blessings for future generations. My life is marked by excellence and integrity. I am making right choices and taking steps of faith. Others will want to follow me. God's abundance is surrounding my life today. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. Have an awesome day, you guys, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email OpenBlindEyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to STOPSIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.